Jozef Gabčík stood in briefing room at Special Training School STS in Bellasis near Arisaig, Scotland, on December 20, 1941, listening to British Special Operations executive officers explaining mission parameters for Operation designated Anthropoid, assassination attempt targeting SS-Obergruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich, who held position as acting Reich protector of Bohemia and Moravia, while simultaneously serving as chief of Reich Main Security Office, coordinating Nazi security apparatus across occupied Europe. Heydrich, often called Butcher of Prague by Czech population suffering under his brutal administration, had implemented terror regime in Czechoslovakia, characterized by mass executions of resistance members, deportation of Czech Jews to concentration camps, and systematic suppression of Czech national identity through policies designed to Germanize Czech population. British intelligence working with Czechoslovak government in exile under President Edvard Beneš had identified Heydrich as high-value target, whose elimination would demonstrate Allied capability to strike even highest-ranking Nazi officials, while simultaneously boosting Czech resistance morale that had suffered setbacks following German occupation. The operational plan for Anthropoid required parachuting trained operatives into Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, where they would establish contact with Czech resistance network, conduct surveillance of Heydrich's movements to identify vulnerable points in his security arrangements, and execute assassination using weapons and explosives provided by SOE. Gabčík, 29-year-old Slovak soldier who had escaped Czechoslovakia after German occupation and joined Czechoslovak forces in Poland before eventually reaching Britain, volunteered for mission understanding risks involved but motivated by desire to strike against Nazi occupation of his homeland. Jan Kubiš, 28-year-old Czech soldier with similar background having fled occupied Czechoslovakia to join resistance forces abroad, partnered with Gabčík for operation, both men receiving intensive training in sabotage techniques, weapons handling, parachute operations, and covert communications during months of preparation at Scottish training facilities operated by SOE. The equipment provided to Anthropoid team included Sten Mark II submachine guns manufactured at British facilities, weapons chosen for compact size and ease of concealment despite reputation for unreliability under field conditions, particularly tendency of magazine feed mechanism to jam when weapon held at certain angles or when using ammunition that did not meet exact specifications. Mills bomb hand grenades represented proven British explosive device that Anthropoid operatives would carry as backup weapons, grenades modified with impact fuses allowing detonation upon striking target rather than requiring time delay, modification intended to increase probability of successful attack against moving vehicle target. The operatives received Czech currency, forged identity documents prepared by SOE document section, civilian clothing appropriate for Czech population, and cyanide capsules to be used if capture appeared imminent, standard suicide devices provided to operatives conducting missions where capture would result in torture, and compromise of resistance networks. The parachute insertion occurred on night of December 28, 1941, when RAF Halifax bomber carrying Anthropoid team, along with second team designated Silver A, conducting separate sabotage mission, flew from Tangmere Airfield in England toward drop zone near Navesdy, east of Prague. Aircraft navigating across occupied Europe at night, using fallen reckoning and limited navigation aids available for covert operations. Weather conditions over drop zone included low clouds and strong winds that complicated parachute operations, forcing crew to circle area multiple times while searching for suitable opening in clouds, delay that extended flight time, and increased risk of German air defense detecting intruding aircraft. Gabčík and Kubiš, along with other operatives, eventually jumped from aircraft at altitude lower than optimal due to cloud conditions, parachute descent through darkness, ending with rough landing in snow-covered terrain several kilometers from intended drop zone. Dispersion of team members requiring hours of searching through winter landscape before operatives could regroup and assess their situation. The reception committee arranged by Czech resistance failed to meet parachutists at planned location due to combination of weather conditions causing late arrival and dispersion of team across wider area than anticipated, forcing Anthropoid operatives to make their way independently toward Prague using forged documents and relying on training and evasion techniques while moving through countryside where German security forces maintained checkpoints and patrols searching for resistance activity. Gabčík and Kubiš eventually established contact with Czech resistance network in Prague, led by individuals including Ladislav Vanek and Jan Zelenka Hajsky, who provided safe houses where operatives could hide while planning assassination attempt. Resistance members understanding risks involved in sheltering paratroopers, but motivated by desire to strike against German occupation, despite knowing that Nazi reprisals for resistance activity typically included execution of civilians and destruction of property. Reinhard Heydrich's position as acting Reich protector required daily commute from residence at Panenské Břežany Castle, located approximately 15 kilometers north of Prague, to office at Prague Castle, where he administered occupation policies, routine that created predictable vulnerability, as Heydrich traveled same route through Prague suburbs most mornings. Security arrangements for Heydrich included driver and bodyguard traveling with him in Mercedes 320 convertible touring car, vehicle chosen by Heydrich for its open design that allowed him to be seen by Czech population as demonstration of German power and confidence. Decision that reflected Heydrich's arrogance regarding his personal security and belief that Czech resistance posed minimal threat to high-ranking Nazi officials. German security services, including Gestapo and SD, maintained surveillance and intelligence operations throughout Prague, attempting to identify resistance members and networks, but effectiveness of these efforts was limited by Czech population's general hostility toward occupation authorities and willingness of many civilians to provide passive support to resistance by refusing to inform on suspicious activities. The Anthropoid team conducted surveillance of Heydrich's route during spring of 1942, observing Mercedes traveling through Prague-Libeň district, where road from Panenské Břežany descended into city along route, including Hairpin turn at intersection, where vehicle would necessarily slow to navigate corner, location identified as optimal ambush site, offering concealment positions for attackers while providing limited escape routes that would complicate German response. Gabčík and Kubiš studied traffic patterns at location, timing of Heydrich's passage, which typically occurred between 9:30 and 10 o'clock in morning, and placement of nearby buildings and vegetation that could provide cover for operatives positioning themselves for attack. The resistance network provided bicycles that operatives would use to approach ambush site, appearing as ordinary commuters, strategy designed to avoid suspicion while allowing quick positioning once Heydrich's Mercedes appeared approaching target area. The morning of May 27, 1942, began with Gabčík and Kubiš taking positions near Hairpin turn at intersection of V. Holešovička Street with Zenklova Street in Prague-Libeň district, operatives accompanied by Jozef Valčík, who positioned himself several hundred meters up road with mirror that he would use to signal approach of Heydrich's Mercedes. Gabčík carried Sten submachine gun concealed under raincoat, weapon providing automatic fire capability that would allow sustained attack on vehicle once Heydrich's car slowed for turn, while Kubiš carried Mills bomb grenades as backup weapons to be employed if Sten gun attack failed or as secondary assault to ensure target's elimination. The operatives waited at corner as morning traffic passed, appearing to civilians as ordinary residents going about daily activities, concealment of weapons and preparation for violence hidden beneath mundane appearance that characterized resistance operations where operators needed to blend into civilian population while maintaining readiness for combat. Gabčík's mirror signal flashed, indicating approach of Mercedes, prompting Gabčík to step into street as dark green convertible containing Heydrich in front passenger seat came into view, approaching Hairpin turn. Vehicle slowing as driver Klein prepared to navigate corner, while Heydrich sat prominently visible in open car scanning surroundings with characteristic arrogance that had characterized his security arrangements. Gabčík raised Sten gun from beneath raincoat and aimed at Heydrich at range of approximately 5 meters. As Mercedes slowed, operative squeezing trigger expecting sustained burst of 9mm fire that would sweep across vehicle, eliminating both Heydrich and driver. The Sten gun failed to fire, magazine feed mechanism jamming in classic malfunction that plagued weapon design, leaving Gabčík standing in street with useless firearm as Heydrich and Klein both reached for weapons, responding to obvious assassination attempt. Jan Kubiš reacted to Sten gun malfunction by moving toward Mercedes from opposite side of street. Mills bomb grenade already in hand as backup plan activated. Operative throwing grenade toward vehicle as Klein attempted to draw pistol, and Heydrich stood in passenger seat, reaching for Luger pistol holstered at his side. The grenade struck rear wheel of Mercedes before detonating, explosion sending shrapnel through vehicle's open passenger compartment and into surrounding street. Blast effects creating chaos as smoke and debris obscured immediate area, while Heydrich stumbled from damaged vehicle, clearly wounded, but still mobile. Klein pursued Gabčík firing pistol as Czech operative fled scene on bicycle. Exchange of gunfire continuing down street as Klein attempted to apprehend assassin, while Heydrich remained at Mercedes' clutching side where shrapnel had penetrated. Kubiš escaped on separate bicycle, pedaling away from ambush site, as civilians scattered seeking cover from gunfire, operative successfully evading immediate pursuit, while Heydrich stood beside damaged Mercedes, directing Klein to pursue attackers rather than attending to his own wounds, decision reflecting Heydrich's priorities that emphasized apprehending resistance operatives over personal medical treatment. The extent of Heydrich's injuries included shrapnel wounds penetrating abdomen and back, fragments from grenade explosion and debris from vehicle's damaged bodywork having created multiple penetrations that would prove lethal despite not being immediately incapacitating. Heydrich refused to lie down or seek immediate medical attention, instead commandeering passing truck and directing driver to transport him to Bulovka Hospital in Prague, where German physicians examined wounds and determined that surgery would be required to remove shrapnel fragments and address internal damage to organs including spleen, which had suffered significant trauma from penetrating fragments. The surgery performed on afternoon of May 27th by German doctors including SS physician Karl Gebhardt, who traveled from Berlin to oversee treatment, initially appeared successful in removing accessible shrapnel and repairing visible damage, but combination of wound contamination from debris driven into tissue by explosion, delayed treatment resulting from Heydrich's initial refusal to seek immediate care, and inadequate antibiotic therapy for preventing infection created conditions that would lead to septicemia developing in days following surgery. German response to assassination attempt began immediately with massive manhunt throughout Prague and surrounding areas. Heinrich Himmler ordering deployment of additional SS and Gestapo personnel to Czechoslovakia while declaring martial law throughout Protectorate. Czech civilians found themselves subjected to intensified security measures, including mandatory registration, restrictions on movement, and threat of collective punishment for sheltering resistance operatives. German proclamations posted throughout Prague announced rewards of 10 million Czech crowns for information leading to arrest of attackers while threatening execution of anyone providing shelter or assistance to operatives. Campaign of intimidation designed to isolate resistance from population support by making harboring of paratroopers too dangerous for civilians to contemplate. Search operations conducted by German security forces included raids on suspected safe houses, interrogations of Czech civilians, and establishment of checkpoints throughout city, attempting to prevent operatives from escaping Prague or maintaining contact with resistance network. Gabčík and Kubiš, along with other paratroopers from related operations, went into hiding at various safe houses throughout Prague, constantly moving to avoid German searches while attempting to maintain low profile as Nazi dragnet intensified. The resistance network struggled to maintain support for operatives as German pressure increased. Many Czech civilians who had previously provided assistance withdrawing support due to fear of reprisals, while German intelligence efforts gradually identified individuals connected to resistance activities. Adolf Opalka, leader of another parachute team who had been conducting separate sabotage operations, consolidated surviving operatives at Church of Saints Cyril and Methodius in Prague's Newtown district, Orthodox Church, whose priests had agreed to provide sanctuary for resistance members despite understanding extraordinary risks involved in sheltering most wanted men in protectorate. Heydrich's condition deteriorated during week following surgery as infection spread through his system. Fever and septicemia indicating that wounds were not healing properly despite efforts of German medical staff attempting various treatments, including experimental sulfonamide drugs that proved ineffective against established infection. Reinhard Heydrich expired on June 4, 1942 at Bulovka Hospital. Complications from wounds sustained in assassination attempt having proven fatal despite week of intensive medical care. Hitler attended Heydrich's state funeral in Berlin on June 9th, Nazi leadership eulogizing Heydrich as martyr while demanding maximum reprisals against Czech population for harboring and supporting resistance operations that had resulted in elimination of one of most powerful figures in Nazi security apparatus. The betrayal that led German forces to Church of Saints Cyril and Methodius came from Karel Čurda, member of another parachute team who surrendered to Gestapo on June 16th and provided information about resistance safe houses and locations where paratroopers were hiding in exchange for reward money and promise of clemency. Čurda's information included details about Church being used as hiding place, intelligence that prompted immediate German response as SS and Gestapo units surrounded Church on morning of June 18th. Approximately 800 German troops, including SS and Wehrmacht soldiers, deployed around Church, establishing perimeter that prevented escape while preparing for assault on building where 7 paratroopers, including Gabčík and Kubiš, defended positions. The assault on Church began with German forces attacking through main entrance, where 4 paratroopers, including Adolf Opalka, defended upper level of building using Sten guns and pistols against overwhelming German force supported by grenades and automatic weapons fire. Fighting in Church interior lasted approximately 2 hours as defenders fired from behind stone pillars and church furnishings, attempting to hold German troops who advanced using grenades to clear each section of building. German forces eventually overwhelmed upper church defenders after sustained combat that consumed massive amounts of ammunition and resulted in German casualties, surviving defenders having fought until ammunition exhausted before German troops secured upper level and began searching building for additional resistance members. Gabčík, Kubiš, and Jozef had taken refuge in crypt beneath Church, underground chamber accessed through narrow entrance that could be defended by small number of personnel against much larger attacking force. German forces discovered crypt entrance and attempted assault downstairs, leading to underground chamber. Attacking troops met by defensive fire from paratroopers positioned below who used limited ammunition to repel initial assault attempts. SS Commander Karl Hermann Frank personally directed siege operations, ordering fire brigade to bring hoses that Germans used to attempt flooding crypt and forcing defenders to surrender. Water pumped into underground chamber through ventilation grates in ceiling of crypt. The paratroopers resisted flooding by attempting to block water flow and bail water from chamber floor. Desperate effort to maintain defensive position as water level rose, and Germans continued pumping thousands of liters into confined space. The final moments in crypt came as flooding attempt failed to force surrender, but depleted defenders' ammunition reserves after hours of combat. Paratroopers recognizing that continued resistance was impossible, and that capture would result in torture and execution. Gabčík, Kubiš, and Bublik used final ammunition, including last rounds in pistols, before employing cyanide capsules provided by SOE for exactly this scenario, operatives choosing self-termination over capture, knowing that interrogation would compromise entire resistance network and result in extensive casualties among Czech civilians who had provided support. German forces entering crypt after gunfire ceased discovered bodies of 3 paratroopers, ending siege that had lasted over 6 hours and required deployment of hundreds of German troops to overcome 7 resistance fighters defending church positions. Nazi reprisal operations following Heydrich's demise and discovery of paratroopers' hiding place included systematic campaign of terror designed to punish Czech population for supporting resistance and to discourage future operations against German occupation authorities. Village of Lidice, located northwest of Prague, became target of Nazi revenge after Gestapo falsely claimed that village had harbored Anthropoid operatives. Entire male population of Lidice, numbering 173 men, executed by firing squad on June 10th, while women and children were separated and sent to concentration camps. German forces demolished every building in Lidice using explosives, razed cemetery, and destroyed all physical traces of village's existence, operation intended to serve as warning about consequences of supporting resistance activities. Village of Ležáky suffered similar fate days later. Entire population terminated, and village destroyed after resistance radio equipment was discovered hidden near settlement. Nazi forces implementing policy of collective punishment that made no distinction between active resistance members and civilians living in proximity to resistance activities. The total Czech casualties from German reprisals following Operation Anthropoid included over 1,300 individuals officially executed by Nazi authorities in addition to unknown numbers who perished in concentration camps or during interrogations. Scale of revenge campaign exceeding even brutal standards that characterized German occupation policies in Eastern Europe. Czechoslovak government in exile faced criticism from some quarters for approving operation that resulted in such extensive civilian casualties. Debate within Czech leadership about whether tactical success of eliminating high-ranking Nazi official justified human cost paid by Czech population subjected to reprisals. Defenders of operation argued that Anthropoid demonstrated Allied capability to strike Nazi leadership and proved that even most protected German officials were vulnerable to determined resistance, psychological impact of operation exceeding immediate tactical results by demonstrating that Nazi occupation was not invulnerable, and that resistance remained active despite German security measures. The investigation of Sten gun malfunction that prevented Gabčík from shooting Heydrich revealed classic feed mechanism jam that resulted from weapon being held at angle that caused magazine spring to fail in advancing next round into firing chamber. Design flaw that affected many Sten variants, and that had been noted in previous combat reports, but not corrected due to weapons' simplified design philosophy emphasizing ease of manufacture over absolute reliability. Kubiš's successful employment of Mills bomb as backup weapon validated SOE operational planning that emphasized multiple attack methods and redundant capabilities, allowing operatives to adapt when primary weapons failed, grenade proving effective despite not achieving immediate elimination of target. The modified impact fuse on grenade performed as designed by detonating upon striking vehicle rather than requiring timed delay, design modification that increased probability of successful engagement against moving target by removing timing uncertainty that characterized standard delay-fused grenades. German security measures implemented following Anthropoid included enhanced protection for high-ranking Nazi officials throughout occupied Europe, Hitler ordering that senior SS and Wehrmacht officers use armored vehicles when traveling through areas where resistance activity posed potential threat. Heydrich's preference for open Mercedes and minimal security escort was recognized as unacceptable vulnerability that had enabled assassination attempt. German authorities implementing protocols requiring closed vehicles, multiple security personnel, and route variation for officials at risk of targeted attacks. The assassination demonstrated effectiveness of targeted operations against Nazi leadership when executed by well-trained operatives with local support, success encouraging Allied planners to consider similar operations against other high-value targets despite political risks associated with inevitable reprisals against civilian populations. Anthropoid's legacy in resistance warfare included demonstration that guerrilla operations could strike strategic targets, causing disproportionate disruption to enemy operations and morale, even when resulting in severe reprisals against supporting population. Strategic value of eliminating Heydrich extended beyond removal of individual official to include message sent to Nazi leadership about vulnerability of occupation authorities and to occupied populations about possibility of effective resistance despite overwhelming German military superiority. Czech resistance continued operations throughout remainder of war, despite decimation following Anthropoid reprisals, surviving networks providing intelligence to allies, and conducting sabotage operations that contributed to eventual liberation of Czechoslovakia in 1945. Jozef Gabčík and Jan Kubiš received posthumous recognition, including Britain's highest award for gallantry and promotion to rank of captain in Czechoslovak forces. British government acknowledging extraordinary courage demonstrated during Operation and Final Stand at Church. Czechoslovak government in exile maintained that sacrifice of operatives and subsequent civilian casualties served larger strategic purpose of demonstrating Czech commitment to Allied cause and maintaining Czechoslovakia's position among nations resisting Nazi aggression. Modern Czech Republic honors Anthropoid operatives as national heroes. Memorial at Church of Saints, Cyril and Methodius, preserving memory of operation while acknowledging civilian suffering that resulted from Nazi reprisals. Complex legacy reflecting both heroism of resistance fighters and tragic cost paid by innocent Czech population. Operation Anthropoid demonstrated capabilities and limitations of special operations targeting enemy leadership in occupied territories, successful elimination of high-value target validating concept of strategic assassination operations, while massive civilian casualties from reprisals highlighted moral and political complexities inherent in guerrilla warfare, where civilian populations could not be separated from military operations. Heydrich's role in planning Holocaust and implementing brutal occupation policies made him legitimate military target from Allied perspective, despite his position as civilian administrator, assassination removing key architect of Nazi genocide, while simultaneously triggering revenge campaign that exemplified Nazi willingness to commit mass atrocities in response to resistance activities. The operation's place in World War II history remains controversial, historians continuing to debate whether tactical success justified human cost while acknowledging undeniable courage of operatives who accepted suicide mission, knowing that success would result in their termination and extensive reprisals against Czech population they sought to liberate. The technical lessons from Anthropoid regarding weapons reliability influenced SOE equipment development for remainder of war. Emphasis placed on testing weapons under field conditions that approximated actual operational employment, rather than relying solely on controlled range testing. Sten guns' continued use despite known reliability issues reflected practical reality that no alternative weapon provided combination of compact size, automatic fire capability, and ease of manufacture that made Sten suitable for resistance operations despite mechanical shortcomings. Mills' bombs' proven effectiveness as backup weapon reinforced operational doctrine requiring multiple attack methods for critical missions, where primary weapon failure could not be allowed to compromise entire operation, redundancy in assault capabilities becoming standard practice for special operations teams conducting high-risk missions behind enemy lines. The broader context of Operation Anthropoid within Allied Special Operations Strategy of 1942 included recognition that conventional military forces alone could not challenge Nazi occupation of Europe, requiring unconventional warfare capabilities that could strike strategic targets and support resistance movements operating in occupied territories. SOE's establishment in July 1940 reflected British understanding that guerrilla operations and sabotage would be necessary components of strategy to weaken German control over conquered territories. Organization developing expertise in covert operations that complemented conventional military campaigns by attacking targets inaccessible to regular forces. Anthropoid represented most ambitious SOE assassination operation to that point in war, targeting official at highest level of Nazi hierarchy rather than local commanders or infrastructure targets that characterized most resistance operations. German occupation of Czechoslovakia following Munich Agreement of 1938 and subsequent establishment of Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia created conditions where Czech population found themselves subjected to Nazi rule without opportunity for armed resistance against overwhelmingly superior German military forces. Heydrich's appointment as acting Reich protector in September 1941 reflected Hitler's dissatisfaction with previous administration under Konstantin von Neurath, who Germans considered too lenient toward Czech population. Heydrich tasked with implementing harsher measures, including accelerated deportation of Jews, suppression of Czech resistance networks, and policies designed to integrate Czech industrial capacity more fully into German war economy. Heydrich's efficiency in executing these policies while simultaneously maintaining industrial production made him valuable asset to Nazi war effort. Removal of his administrative capabilities, disrupting German occupation machinery even beyond symbolic impact of his termination. Czech resistance networks supporting Anthropoid operation included diverse groups ranging from communist-aligned organizations receiving direction from Moscow to nationalist resistance members loyal to government in exile in London. Temporary unity among these factions achieved by shared goal of striking against German occupation despite ideological differences that would resurface after war. Coordination between external planners at SOE and internal resistance networks operating under severe German security pressure required complex communications arrangements, including radio transmissions, courier networks, and coded messages, each element of communications chain representing potential vulnerability where German counterintelligence could intercept information and compromise operations. Success of Anthropoid in maintaining operational security until actual assassination attempt demonstrated effectiveness of compartmentalized planning, where individual resistance members knew only information necessary for their specific roles, limiting damage if any single member faced capture and interrogation. Heydrich's personal background as career SS officer who had risen through Nazi security apparatus since joining party in 1931, influenced his approach to occupation administration, bringing systematic ruthlessness that characterized SS operations to governance of occupied Czech territory. Heydrich's chairmanship of Wannsee Conference in January 1942, where Nazi leadership formalized plans for Holocaust implementation, made him directly responsible for coordinating genocide machinery across occupied Europe, role that extended his significance beyond administration of Czech protectorate, to include central position in Nazi mass murder apparatus. Allied intelligence awareness of Heydrich's role in Holocaust planning added moral dimension to assassination operation, eliminating official directly responsible for organizing industrial-scale genocide, representing act of justice beyond purely military calculation. Training provided to Anthropoid operatives at British facilities emphasized practical skills required for covert operations, including weapons handling under various conditions, explosive devices employment, unarmed combat, survival techniques, and psychological preparation for operating under extreme stress in hostile environment. Physical conditioning included endurance training, preparing operatives for extended periods without adequate rest or nutrition that characterized underground existence in occupied territory. Psychological training, attempting to prepare personnel for isolation, constant danger, and moral weight of conducting operations, knowing that failure or capture would result in severe reprisals against civilian populations. Despite thorough preparation provided by SOE training programs, actual operational conditions in occupied Prague exceeded training scenarios in severity and complexity. German security measures proving more extensive than intelligence briefings suggested, while psychological burden of living underground, knowing that entire resistance network depended on operational security, created stress levels impossible to fully simulate during training. Czech civilian support for Anthropoid operation, despite understanding that German reprisals would be severe, demonstrated extraordinary courage by ordinary citizens who provided shelter, food, intelligence, and logistical support to operatives conducting mission. Families harboring paratroopers faced not only risk of execution if discovered, but also knowledge that their children and relatives would likely be punished for their actions. Collective punishment policies, making resistance support family decision rather than individual choice. Some resistance members who initially supported operation attempted to persuade operatives to abandon assassination or leave Czechoslovakia after Heydrich's wounds became known, recognizing that reprisals would be catastrophic regardless of whether Heydrich survived. Debate within resistance about whether to continue supporting operatives reflecting desperate attempt to minimize civilian casualties while acknowledging that operatives themselves had no means of escaping protectorate once manhunt began. German intelligence failures that allowed Anthropoid operation to proceed included underestimation of SOE capabilities in infiltrating operatives into occupied territory and insufficient appreciation of Czech resistance network's extent, despite Gestapo efforts to infiltrate and compromise resistance organizations. Heydrich's personal arrogance regarding his security arrangements contributed to operational success. Refusal to use armored vehicle or very route, creating predictable vulnerability that trained operatives could exploit despite German security presence throughout Prague. German overconfidence in occupation security measures prevented implementation of precautions that might have detected parachute infiltration or identified operatives during months of surveillance and planning that preceded assassination attempt. Security failures highlighting limitations of even extensive police state apparatus when facing determined covert operators with popular support. Anthropoid's impact on subsequent Allied operations included increased emphasis on targeting enemy leadership and key officials rather than focusing exclusively on infrastructure and military targets. Recognition that eliminating capable administrators and security officials could disrupt occupation machinery as effectively as sabotaging factories or transportation networks. British and American Special Operations Forces conducted additional targeted operations throughout the remainder of war, including operations against Japanese officials in Southeast Asia and German commanders in occupied Europe. Assassination operations becoming accepted component of unconventional warfare, despite political and moral controversies surrounding targeted attacks. Soviet partisan forces operating in Eastern Europe conducted extensive assassination campaigns against German occupation personnel. Operations characterized by less concern about civilian reprisals than Western Allied operations, but demonstrating similar strategic logic that removing capable enemy administrators degraded occupation effectiveness. Legacy of Operation Anthropoid in post-war Czechoslovakia included complex reappraisal of operations' cost and benefits as Czech population confronted extent of civilian suffering caused by Nazi reprisals. Debate about whether government in exile's decision to authorize operation, knowing that reprisals would be severe, represented acceptable strategic choice or unnecessary sacrifice of Czech civilians for limited military gain. Communist government that controlled Czechoslovakia after war initially downplayed role of London-based government in exile operatives in favor of emphasizing communist resistance activities. Distortion of historical record that minimized Anthropoid's significance until political changes in late 20th century allowed more balanced assessment. Modern Czech historiography recognizes both extraordinary courage of Anthropoid operatives and tragic cost paid by civilian population, acknowledging complexity of moral judgments involved in resistance operations, where military necessity and civilian protection created irreconcilable tensions. The comparative analysis of Anthropoid with other World War II assassination operations highlights unique characteristics of Czech operation, including targeting of highest-ranking Nazi official successfully eliminated by Allied operations during war, scale of reprisals that exceeded response to other resistance actions, and level of operational planning and support required for mission conducted hundreds of kilometers behind enemy lines. Operation against Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, conducted by American forces in April 1943, shared strategic goal of eliminating key enemy leader, but benefited from air superiority, allowing fighter interception of Yamamoto's aircraft rather than requiring ground operatives to conduct close-range attack in occupied territory. German Operation Valkyrie attempt to eliminate Hitler in July 1944 demonstrated challenges of conducting assassination operations even with access provided by officers within German military structure. Failure of multiple attempts against Hitler despite insider support, highlighting difficulties inherent in targeting well-protected leaders. Heydrich's replacement as acting Reich protector by Kurt Daluege and subsequently Wilhelm Frick reflected German difficulty in finding administrator with Heydrich's combination of ruthless efficiency and organizational capability. Subsequent protectors proving less effective in implementing Nazi occupation policies while dealing with resistance networks that had been weakened but not eliminated by reprisals following Anthropoid. German resources devoted to manhunt and reprisal operations diverted personnel and attention from other security tasks during critical period of war when partisan activity in Eastern Europe was increasing, and Allied bombing campaign against German industrial targets was intensifying. Strategic disruption caused by Heydrich's elimination and subsequent security response exceeded immediate tactical impact of single official's termination, demonstrating principle that targeted operations against key personnel could achieve disproportionate effects when carefully planned and executed against vulnerable points in enemy command structure. Technical intelligence gathered from Anthropoid operation informed British understanding of German occupation security measures, including recognition that even high-ranking officials could be vulnerable to attack, when operational arrogance led to inadequate security precautions, lesson emphasizing importance of targeting moments of vulnerability rather than attempting direct assaults against well-protected targets. Heydrich's daily commute represented classic vulnerability created by routine that made movements predictable despite security escorts. Same pattern of predictable behavior enabling American interception of Yamamoto's aircraft and Soviet targeting of German commanders, who established recognizable patterns in their movements and communications. Modern counterterrorism doctrine, emphasizing unpredictable schedules and varied routes for protected officials, reflects lessons learned from World War II assassination operations, including Anthropoid, that demonstrated lethality of attacks against routine targets. Operation Anthropoid, when two Czechoslovak paratroopers changed course of European resistance warfare through elimination of Nazi official ranked third most powerful leader in German Reich, after Hitler and Göring, where Sten gun malfunction forced adaptation to back up Mills' bomb grenade that achieved mission objective despite failing to provide immediate termination, and where final stand of 7 resistance fighters in Prague Church against 800 SS troops demonstrated determination of Czech resistance, despite overwhelming German military superiority, represents unique chapter in World War II history, showing that individual operatives with proper training and local support could strike strategic targets despite extensive security measures. The hairpin turn in Prague-Libeň, where Gabčík stepped into street with jammed Sten gun, the Mercedes 320, Convertible with Heydrich standing in passenger seat reaching for pistol, and Church Crypt, where final 3 paratroopers chose self-termination over capture, serve as permanent reminders that resistance warfare depends not just on superior numbers or technology, but on courage of individuals willing to sacrifice everything for larger cause they considered worth any personal cost. The memorial plaques and commemorative sites throughout Prague, including bronze monument at site of assassination attempt and preserved church crypt where final resistance occurred, serve modern Czech Republic as physical connection to Operation Anthropoid, locations visited by thousands annually who seek to understand sacrifice made by resistance fighters and Czech civilians who supported operation despite knowing consequences would include terrible reprisals. Educational programs in Czech schools ensure younger generations understand context of operation within broader history of World War II and Czech resistance to Nazi occupation. Curriculum presenting both heroism of operatives and tragedy of reprisals as intertwined elements of single historical event that cannot be separated or simplified into uncomplicated narrative of triumph or tragedy. International recognition of Anthropoid, including British and American acknowledgement of operation's significance in resistance warfare, maintains awareness of operation beyond Czech borders, ensuring that sacrifice of Gabčík, Kubiš, and supporting resistance members receives recognition from nations that benefited from their contribution to Allied victory, even while Czech population paid immediate price in lives and suffering that followed successful assassination. Operation Anthropoid's enduring significance in military history and popular culture, including films and books. Examining Operation demonstrates continued fascination with story combining elements of courage, sacrifice, technical expertise, and moral complexity that characterize most profound human choices made under extreme circumstances of war.